Uproar, Antonblast. Man, the Wario Land games were so good. We haven't really seen a new entry in that series for a very long while, not since Shake It on the Wii. But thankfully, we have seen several indie developers start to take up the idea of continuing the series in spirit, in their own ways. We already had one example of that in Pizza Tower, that released back in 2023, but while the excitement and fervor around that game was prominent, there was another game being developed around the same time that released at the tail end of 2024, with a jagged and striking aesthetic and a rather explosive personality, coupled with some truly bizarre and yet captivating advertisements.
You know, it's pretty hard being a single dad. You're raising a little pink hedgehog girl.
That game is Antonblast, and now having played it, I have some thoughts. Mostly good, but some more critical. Let's talk about it. So let's start off with the fact that I absolutely love the angular, unhinged, constantly over-the-top character and environment design. While there are only a small handful of cutscenes that play during the game itself, all of the characters have very obvious and out-there personalities that are conveyed beautifully through both their designs and their animations. The villain of the game, Satan himself, is basically the spitting image of the red guy from Cow and Chicken, in mannerisms if nothing else. But it's also just nice to play as a protagonist who really doesn't give a damn about anything. Anton is an antisocial, rude, selfish individual who only is in this situation because the devil, who was jealous of how red Anton is, stole his collection of alcoholic spirits, which may have in turn originally been stolen, with the only other person he really seems to care about being his co-worker Annie, who is just as destructive and obnoxious as him. It's a purely selfish quest, and that's honestly fine because it leads to some really funny moments. The environment design itself is also very fun to look at, as every level feels very distinct from one another, and there are even some fun gimmicks mixed in here and there to make them feel even more unique. Like the haunted bathhouse basically being a liminal space that will alter and rebuild itself every time a section of it is off-screen. Regardless of how the levels look or are structured, the basic goal for each level is the same. You run through, hitting dynamite boxes to clear out certain blocks that keep you from progressing until you find the giant box near the end. When you leap onto it, you activate Happy Hour, and have a certain amount of time to run all the way back through the level, usually through an alternate route than the one that you originally took, to get back to the elevator and exit the level before everything blows up around you. Through all of this, you will always run into the spirit, the drink, from that level and will automatically collect it. Grabbing every spirit is the goal of the game, so the fact that completing the level will pretty much always mean grabbing it along the way is nice, especially when you need to grab it during the stress of Happy Hour. There are other collectibles to grab during each level, however, which is how the game gets a majority of its replay value. Aside from the spirit, every level has a piece of junk, an old mixtape, and a spray can, and all three of these are usually very out of the way and well hidden, or require you to complete a difficult optional area in order to grab them. Thankfully, you don't have to grab all of this in a single run. If you collect one and complete the level, the item will be permanently collected the next time you go back in, so you can complete the level multiple times to get everything. Traversing the levels is also a lot of fun too, as Anton and his co-worker Annie both have very simple but effective movesets. You can swap between the two of them at any point using the bathrooms in the hub area, but they're basically just palette swaps. Aside from some very unique animations and some unique dialogue for certain scenes, they have all of the same moves, and it's a short move list all things considered. You have a basic jump and a slide that you can use to break obstacles in tight spaces or enemies that can't be attacked from other angles, but the main move in your arsenal is the shoulder barge, or as this game calls it, the clutch. You can dash into enemies on the ground, but you can also perform multiple clutches, one after the other, to essentially build up a boost combo to keep yourself going at top speed. And by performing a clutch just before slamming into an enemy, you can slingshot off of them, giving you a massive boost of speed. Performing this into a line of enemies not only gives you massive speed boosts, but also feels really good to pull off. You can also use the clutch in the air, and by doing so, you can not only slam onto enemies from above, but can also pogo off the ground, which will keep you safe from spiky terrain, but also allows you to get more height than your normal jump. You can chain these together in order to reach some pretty impressive heights. Even with these simple tools, it really makes you feel like you can pull off some pretty impressive movement combinations, and when you get the chance to get moving, it is a joy to behold. when you can actually tell what you're doing. And this is where the biggest issue of the game comes from. The game's not broken, it's not buggy or glitchy, no, everything in it works beautifully, and there's no fault in its control. Well, maybe the jump is just a little bit more floaty than I would like, but that's honestly a minor nitpick, considering how tight the rest of the controls feel. Playing the game feels great most of the time. Its problem is more in its presentation. You remember before when I was praising the visuals and how much it reminded me of the animation of my childhood? How everything in it has this distinct standout design, and even the environments are just as expressive, unique, and visually varied all the time? That's where Antonblast really struggles. It has a bit of a conveyance problem. The game loves throwing a lot of stuff at you at once, but generally, because of the way everything is designed, it is very difficult to tell what is immediately important. And later in the game, where moving with a lot of speed becomes pretty necessary to safely traverse some areas, it can be a killer. Because the game tends to give so much visual importance to everything on screen at once, it's tough to tell what is and isn't a platform in some areas. It's tough to tell how many enemies or projectiles on screen. And at the worst of times, it's tough to tell just where Anton or Annie even are. In some situations, this can be used for spectacle. The game has 2 instances where you get to jump aboard a mech suit and basically just go whole hog with it as you run through the level, destroying everything in front of you. But in situations where you're actually required to be precise in your movement in order to avoid damage, it is a problem. The boss fights probably suffer the most from this. There are 4 mini-bosses and 4 major ones that you'll fight throughout the game, and especially during the major boss fights, keeping track of everything that's happening and how to avoid it all is really difficult. To the point where I swear I won most of them just off of vibes alone. Just the amount of stuff you're expected to keep track of actually made me go cross-eyed at some points. There's even a built-in help mechanic where when you hit the last hit point during a boss fight, Broly, this poor, nearly bankrupt property mogul who runs the in-game shop, will toss you a health item, up to 3 times per boss fight. But I'm convinced that the only reason this mechanic exists is because of the visual confusion of most of the fights, which makes it very hard to avoid taking a lot of damage. It also doesn't help that Brulo suddenly appearing on screen in and of itself can be a massive distraction, especially when you're desperate for the heal. Credit where it's due, the game is very good about giving you checkpoints. Granted, the levels themselves tend to be a bit on the long side, and occasionally you do end up with some sections that can feel like they go on for a bit too long before giving you said checkpoint, but mini-bosses are short enough that they're fought straight from beginning to end, and major bosses have a checkpoint after every phase of their fight, so you can learn their patterns and persevere eventually. But again, it's not really learning the patterns that's the problem so much as the visual confusion that comes from playing it. That's why the first phase against Satan himself is actually my favorite fight, because it all comes down to learning his moveset. His moves are telegraphed quickly, but are still pretty difficult to dodge, and as the fight goes on, the moves become more complex, more difficult to dodge, and you really have to pay attention, but there's not so much visual confusion that I have no idea what is happening. At this point, I do need to stress I really liked this game. I did have a genuinely good time playing it. It feels good, it has a lot of charm and personality, the controls feel wonderful, and exploring this weird and twisted world is a great time. The extras that you can unlock, like the spray cans for more palette swaps, or the mixtapes that give you access to more and more of the game's soundtrack to listen to casually, are a great reward for continuing to explore it. When the game makes it clear where you can and can't go and gives you the time and clarity you need to process everything happening on screen, it is legitimately a fun time, and the 6 or so hours I spent playing it was overall a positive experience. And I do plan to go back and grab the secrets at each level at some point. But during the times where the game just throws visual noise at you, or starts shaking the screen or throwing explosions and particles everywhere, it can really get to be a bit much. And considering these moments happened mostly during boss fights or moments where you're under a pretty big time crunch, the added stress of the situation does not help much at all. Would I recommend this game? Oh yeah, definitely. Like I said, it is a fun time, but I do also think it's important to go into a game knowing what to expect when it comes to things like this. It is absolutely worth the price of admission, and obviously it didn't get to the point where I was frustrated enough to just stop playing. Like learning Satan's attacks and how to counter them, you can sort of get a feel for how things are going to play out, and while I do still feel like I take a bit of cheap damage now and then, I do get that feeling of triumph and satisfaction when I do eventually manage to overcome the level or boss that was giving me such a hard time. Just know you will struggle at points with the game's lack of easy-to-read visual language. But hey, if the game doesn't work out for you, you could always play the game that came before it, Antonball. Ah, hell yeah. I love a good block breaker with a twist.